The Thursday sun beat down on Red Hollow like it had a grudge. Dust swirled in lazy circles down Main Street, catching in the creases of Caleb Mercer's work shirt as he stood outside the post office. Same as he did every week. Same spot. Same time. Same hope chewing at his insides. He wasn't a man who believed in much beyond what he could touch. Calloused hands, solid wood, honest work. But for 4 months now, he'd been believing in something else. Someone else. Marianne Hale. He'd never seen her face, never heard her voice, but he knew the careful slant of her handwriting, the way she never wasted words but somehow made each one count. She wrote about practical things, crops and weather and the weight of loneliness, but underneath it all ran something warmer, something that made him read her letters twice before folding them back into his coat pocket. The stagecoach was late. Caleb pulled out his pocket watch for the third time in 10 minutes. The silver case was tarnished, inherited from a father who'd died before teaching him much of anything useful. 2:15. The stage should have rolled in at 2. "She'll come when she comes, Mercer." Caleb glanced sideways. Tom Bridger leaned against the post office wall, whittling a piece of pine into something that might become a whistle if he ever finished it. Tom ran the general store and considered everyone's business his own personal concern. "Didn't ask for commentary, Tom." "No, but you're standing there like a condemned man waiting for the noose. Makes folks nervous. Then folks should mind their looking." Tom grinned, showing the gap between his front teeth. "Can't help it. Whole town's been buzzing since word got out you're bringing in a mail-order bride. Hell, Caleb, you've barely said 10 words to a woman in the 5 years I've known you. Now you're importing one?" "She's not cargo." "Didn't say she was. Just saying it's unexpected." Caleb didn't respond. Let Tom think what he wanted. The truth was simpler and harder to explain. He was tired. Tired of eating alone. Tired of fixing fence posts with no one to notice when he did a good job. Tired of winters so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat and nothing else. Marianne's first letter had been formal, almost stiff. "I am seeking a partnership built on mutual respect and shared labor. I do not expect romance, but I will not tolerate cruelty. If these terms are acceptable, please respond." He'd responded the same day. 3 months of letters later, they'd agreed. She would come to Red Hollow. They would marry. They would build something together, even if neither of them quite knew what that something looked like yet. The sound of hoofbeats and rattling wheels cut through the afternoon stillness. Caleb's chest tightened. He straightened his collar, then felt stupid for doing it, and shoved his hands in his pockets instead. The stagecoach rounded the corner, 6 horses throwing up clouds of dust that turned the sunlight hazy. It pulled to a stop in front of the post office with a groan of wood and leather. Tom stopped whittling. "Well, hell, here we go." The driver, a grizzled man named Jessup, who'd been running this route since before Caleb was born, climbed down with the stiffness of someone who'd spent too many hours on a hard bench. He spat tobacco juice into the dirt and nodded at Caleb. "Mercer." "Jessup." "Got a passenger for you." Caleb's throat went dry. "Just one?" "Just one." The door swung open, and everything Caleb had imagined, every quiet conversation he'd rehearsed in his head, every awkward first moment he'd tried to prepare for, evaporated like morning dew. The woman who stepped down from the stagecoach was not Marianne Hale. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe late 20s, dark hair pulled back in a tight braid, riding clothes instead of a traveling dress, worn leather pants, a brown jacket with dust on the shoulders, boots made for hard use, and on her right hip, impossible to miss, a gun belt with a revolver that looked like it had seen plenty of work. She scanned the street with eyes that didn't stop moving, taking in the storefronts, the people starting to gather, the alleys and rooflines. When her gaze finally landed on Caleb, it didn't soften. "Caleb Mercer?" Her voice was lower than Marianne's letters had sounded in his head, rougher. "That's me." She walked toward him, each step deliberate. Up close he could see the faint scar along her jawline, the way her hand never strayed far from her weapon. This was someone who expected trouble and knew how to meet it. "I need to speak with you, privately." Tom Bridger had abandoned all pretense of whittling. "Ma'am, if you're looking for—" "I'm not looking for anything from you." She didn't even glance at Tom. Her focus stayed locked on Caleb. "Mr. Mercer, now." Caleb felt the eyes of half the town boring into his back. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Where was Marianne? Why was this armed stranger asking for him by name? My place is 2 miles out, he said slowly. We can talk there. Fine. She turned without waiting for him, walking back to the stagecoach to retrieve a travel bag and a rifle case. Jessup handed them down, his expression carefully neutral. Safe travels, Miss Vance, Jessup said. Vance, not Hale. Caleb's stomach dropped. Tom moved closer, lowering his voice. Caleb, what the hell is this? Don't know yet. You want me to fetch the sheriff? No. Caleb watched the woman, Vance, check the rifle case with practiced efficiency. Not yet. His wagon was hitched outside the general store. Caleb led the way, painfully aware of the whispers starting to spread behind him. By sunset, every household in Red Hollow would have a theory about the strange woman with the gun who'd arrived instead of his bride. She threw her bags into the wagon bed without help and climbed up onto the bench seat. Caleb took the reins, clicked his tongue, and the horses started moving. They rode in silence for the first half-mile. The road out to Caleb's ranch followed the edge of the valley, where the land started to lift toward the hills. Cottonwoods lined the creek bed, their leaves turning gold with the early autumn chill. It was beautiful country, hard and dry, but beautiful if you knew how to look at it. Finally, Caleb couldn't take it anymore. You gonna tell me who you are? I did. Rhea Vance. That doesn't tell me why you're here instead of Marianne Hale. Rhea didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the road ahead, on the hills rising in the distance. Marianne sent me. Why? Because she's in trouble. The words hit like a physical blow. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. What kind of trouble? The kind that kills people. She reached into her jacket and pulled out an envelope. The handwriting on the front was Marianne's. He'd know it anywhere. His name, written in her careful script. He took it with one hand, the other keeping the horses steady. When did she give you this? 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. His last letter from Marianne had arrived a month ago. He'd assumed she was busy preparing for the journey, tying up loose ends. Instead, is she alive? For now. Caleb tore open the envelope. The letter inside was short. Caleb, I cannot come to you as we planned. Men have learned about my inheritance, and they mean to take it by force. They have already tried once. I fear they will try again. Rhea Vance is a friend I trust with my life. She will explain everything. Please listen to her. Please believe her. I am sorry for the hope I cannot fulfill. M. Caleb read it twice, then a third time, like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. What inheritance? Land, Rhea said. 200 acres in Colorado. Her father bought it 20 years ago. Thought he was getting scrub. Turned out there's silver underneath, a lot of it. How much is a lot? Enough that 3 different mining operations want it. Enough that men started showing up at her door with offers, then threats, then worse. The wagon hit a rut and Caleb barely noticed. His mind was racing, trying to piece together a picture from fragments. She never mentioned any of this in her letters. She wouldn't have. Letters can be intercepted, read, used. Used how? Rhea finally looked at him. Her eyes were gray, like storm clouds. They thought she was coming here, to you. They thought if they followed her letters, they'd find her hiding under a new name, waiting to claim the land through a husband they couldn't touch. Understanding crashed over Caleb like cold water. They think she's already here. They think she's your wife, or will be soon enough. But she's not. Doesn't matter what's true. Matters what they believe. The ranch came into view. A simple cabin with a covered porch, a barn that needed paint, corrals where his horses dozed in the afternoon heat. Caleb had spent the last month fixing every broken board, patching every leak, making it ready for someone who wasn't coming. He pulled the wagon to a stop near the porch and set the brake. So you came to warn me. I came to draw them here. Rhea climbed down, shouldering her rifle case. Marianne's safe as long as they think she's in Red Hollow. Once they figure out she's not, they'll go back to Colorado, and she won't survive the next attempt. You're using me as bait. I'm using your ranch as a fortress. She turned to face him fully. I've seen the layout from the road. Good sight lines, open approaches, defensible if you know what you're doing. And you know what you're doing. I've been doing it for 6 years. Caleb stepped down from the wagon, his boots hitting the dirt with a dull thud. Doing what exactly? Keeping people alive when other people want them dead. She said it without pride or shame, just fact. Caleb studied her, the way she stood, the way her hand stayed near her gun even now. This wasn't someone playing at toughness. This was someone who'd earned every scar. How many men are we talking about? At least 4, maybe more. When? They were 2 days behind me when I left. Could be here by tomorrow, could be tonight. Caleb looked at his ranch, his quiet, simple, peaceful ranch, and felt something crack inside his chest. Not breaking, shifting. I didn't ask for this. Neither did Marianne. She could have told me. In her letters. I would have... He stopped. Would have what? Told her to go to the law? The law didn't care about threats, only bodies. Told her to sell the land? Men like that didn't negotiate. You would have tried to help, Rhea finished for him, and gotten yourself killed before you understood what you were up against. And now? Now you have a choice. She pulled her rifle from its case, checked the action with movements so smooth they looked like breathing. You can ask me to leave. Go back to town, tell everyone this was a mistake, and hope those men believe you when they show up. Hope they don't hurt you just to make sure. Or you can help me make this place ready. And when they come, we make sure they understand that Marianne Hale isn't here, and even if she was, she's not worth dying for. The sun was starting its slide toward the horizon, painting the hills in shades of amber and rust. Caleb's horses nickered softly in the corral. A hawk circled overhead, hunting. He'd built this life on routine, predictability. The kind of quiet where the loudest sound was wind through grass. That life was already gone. The barn needs mucking, he said finally. Fence on the north pasture has 3 posts that won't last the winter, and I've got a leak in the cabin roof that I can't reach without help. Rhea's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. That's a yes? That's me saying if you're staying, you work. I don't keep anyone who doesn't pull their weight. She almost smiled, almost. Fair enough. They worked until dark. Rhea proved she wasn't lying about knowing her way around a ranch. She handled the horses without fuss, forked hay like she'd done it 1,000 times, and when Caleb pointed out the leaking section of roof, she climbed the ladder without hesitation. By the time the stars came out, she'd patched it better than he could have managed alone. Caleb cooked dinner, beans, bacon, cornbread. Simple food, but there was plenty of it. They ate on the porch, plates balanced on their knees, the night settling around them like a blanket. You learned all that from your father? Rhea asked, nodding toward the barn. Most of it. Learned the rest from failing until I didn't. Where is he now? Dead? 10 years back. Fever took him in 3 days. Your mother? Never knew her. Died when I was born. Rhea nodded, chewing slowly. That why you wrote to Marianne? The question was too direct, too personal. A week ago, Caleb would have shut it down. But something about sitting in the dark with someone who'd ridden 200 miles into danger made normal boundaries feel pointless. Got tired of talking to myself. Could have found someone in town. Tried. Didn't take. He set his empty plate aside. Women in Red Hollow see a rancher living alone, and they either want to fix you or they think you're broken past fixing. Marianne just wanted a partner. She still does. But not with me. She never said that. Didn't have to. Caleb leaned back against the porch post. She's got silver and men hunting her. I've got 60 head of cattle and a mortgage. We're not in the same world anymore. Rhea was quiet for a long moment. Somewhere out in the darkness, a coyote yipped and another answered. You're wrong, she said finally. About what? Marianne doesn't care about the silver. She'd sign it all away tomorrow if it meant those men would leave her alone. But it doesn't work like that. They won't stop because she's poor. They'll stop because they're dead or in jail or convinced she's not worth the risk. And that's where you come in. That's where we come in. She stood, gathering the plates. You still think you're not part of this, Mercer, but you have been since the first letter. Those men know your name. They know this ranch. They know Marianne was supposed to come here. You're already in their sights whether you like it or not. The truth of it settled in his gut like bad whiskey. She was right. He'd been part of this the moment Marianne had written his address on that first envelope. How do you know her? Caleb asked. Marianne. How'd you meet? Rhea paused in the doorway. Her father hired me 3 years ago. Someone was stealing cattle, and the local sheriff didn't care enough to figure out who. I figured it out, stopped it. Her father paid me well and told me if I ever needed work, his door was open. And when he died? Marianne honored that. She's good people, Mercer, better than most. That's why I'm here. She disappeared inside, leaving Caleb alone with the night. He sat there for another hour, listening to the familiar sounds of his ranch settling down for sleep. The creak of wood cooling, the soft shuffle of horses in the barn, the wind moving through the cottonwoods down by the creek. Tomorrow, that peace might end. Men might come with guns and demands and violence. And Caleb Mercer, who'd spent 5 years avoiding conflict of any kind, would have to decide what he was willing to fight for. He went inside eventually. Rhea had already claimed the small side room, barely more than a closet, really, but it had a bed and a door that closed. Caleb banked the fire in the stove, checked the locks on the doors and windows, and climbed into his own bed. Sleep came slowly. When it did, he dreamed of stagecoaches that never arrived, and letters that burned before he could read them. He woke to the sound of Rhea moving around the cabin. Dawnlight filtered through the curtains, gray and thin. Caleb dressed quickly and found her in the main room, reassembling her revolver after a thorough cleaning. "Coffee's on," she said without looking up. He poured himself a cup and stood at the window, watching the ranch wake up. Mist clung to the low places. The horses were already restless, sensing something off. "When they come," Caleb said. "What's the play?" "Depends on how smart they are." Rhea snapped the cylinder back into place and spun it. "Smart men will scout first. Watch the place. Try to confirm Marianne's here before they make a move. Stupid men will just kick down your door and ask questions after." "Which kind are we dealing with?" "The kind who hired guns instead of doing the work themselves. So probably smart, or at least smart enough to be dangerous." Caleb drank his coffee, thinking. There's a ridge about a quarter-mile north, good view of the whole valley. If they're scouting, that's where they'll do it. "Show me." They saddled 2 horses and rode out. The morning was cool, the kind of cold that promised an early winter. Rhea rode like she'd been born on horseback, easy and confident. She studied the land as they went, noting sight lines and cover, places where an ambush might work and places where it wouldn't. The ridge was exactly where Caleb said it would be. A long rocky outcropping that gave a clear view down into the valley where his ranch sat like a toy in a bowl. Rhea dismounted and walked the length of it, testing the footing, checking angles. "You're right. This is where I'd set up if I was them." "So what do? We make sure they see what we want them to see." She explained her plan on the ride back. It was simple. Maybe too simple, but it was better than sitting around waiting to get shot. For the next 2 days, they established a routine. Rhea made herself visible, working around the ranch, riding the property line, doing everything a woman living there might do. To anyone watching from the ridge, it would look like Caleb had brought his bride home and life was continuing as normal. Except nothing was normal. Caleb slept with his rifle next to the bed. Rhea slept in shifts, always listening. They didn't talk much. When they did, it was practical, what needed fixing, what supplies were running low, how many rounds of ammunition they had between them. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, Caleb caught himself watching her. The way she moved through space like she owned it. The way she could be perfectly still for minutes at a time, then explode into motion when something needed doing. She was nothing like Marianne's letters had promised, soft and steady and safe. She was sharp edges and old wounds and a kind of loneliness that made his own look small. On the 3rd day, everything changed. Caleb was in the barn, forking fresh hay into the stalls, when Rhea appeared in the doorway. Her face was set, her hand on her gun. "They're here." His heart kicked against his ribs. "Where?" "The ridge. 2 of them. Been there since sunrise." "How do you know?" "Because I've been watching for them. And because one of them was stupid enough to let the sun catch his scope." Caleb set down the pitchfork. His hands were steadier than he expected. "What now?" "Now we give them something to think about," she explained as they walked back to the cabin. They needed the watchers to believe Marianne was here, but they also needed to make an assault seem risky enough that the men would hesitate. Fear was a better deterrent than walls. At noon, Caleb rode into town alone. It felt wrong, leaving Rhea at the ranch, but she'd insisted. They need to see you acting normal, doing what you'd do if nothing was wrong. What if they come while I'm gone? Then I'll handle it. She said it with such complete certainty that Caleb almost believed her. Red Hollow looked the same as always, dusty, half asleep, going about its business. Caleb stopped at the general store for supplies, exchanged stiff pleasantries with Tom Bridger, and picked up his mail at the post office. Nothing from Marianne. He didn't expect there to be, but the empty mailbox still hit like a gut punch. On the ride back, he took the long way, circling around so he'd pass near the base of the ridge. He didn't look up, didn't give any sign he knew he was being watched, just rode steady and easy, like a man whose biggest worry was whether the autumn rains would come early. When he got back to the ranch, Rhea was on the porch, cleaning tack. "They still there?" he asked, dismounting. "Yeah. And now they know you're not keeping her locked inside." "This is insane. This is strategy." That night, they ate dinner like always, talked in low voices about nothing important. To anyone watching from a distance, it would look like a normal evening, a couple settling into the rhythm of shared life. But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on his back. After dark, Rhea climbed up to the barn loft with her rifle and a blanket. "I'll take first watch." "You need sleep." "I'll sleep when they're gone." Caleb wanted to argue, but the set of her jaw told him it wouldn't matter. He went into the cabin and tried to settle down, but his mind wouldn't stop spinning. Somewhere out there, men were planning how to take what they wanted, and here he was, a rancher who'd never shot at anything but coyotes and rattlesnakes, pretending he could stop them. He must have dozed off eventually, because he woke to Rhea shaking his shoulder. The cabin was dark. Her hand was over his mouth. "Quiet," she whispered. "They're coming." His blood turned to ice. "How many?" "Can't tell. At least 3 on horseback. Moving slow." Caleb grabbed his rifle and followed her to the window. Outside, the ranch was bathed in moonlight. He could see the barn, the corrals, the fence line, but no riders. "There," Rhea pointed. Movement at the tree line. Shadows resolving into shapes. Men on horses, walking them slow and quiet. They stopped about 100 yards out. For a long moment, nothing happened. The men just sat there, conferring. Then one of them dismounted and started walking toward the cabin, hands clearly visible and empty. "It's a parley," Rhea said. "You sure?" "No, but we're about to find out." She moved to the door and opened it, stepping out onto the porch with her rifle cradled in her arms. Caleb followed, his heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. The man approaching stopped 20 feet from the porch. He was tall, middle-aged, with a thick beard and a voice like gravel. "That's close enough for talking, I figure." "Talk then," Rhea said. "We're looking for someone. Marianne Hale. We have business with her." "She's not here." "Now, see, we have information suggests otherwise." The man's tone was almost friendly. Almost. "We know she was corresponding with a man named Caleb Mercer. We know she was planning to come to Red Hollow, and we know you," he nodded at Rhea, "are new around here. Information's wrong. Then you won't mind if we come inside and verify that." "Yes," Caleb said, stepping forward. "I will mind." The man's eyes flicked to him. "That makes things complicated, Mr. Mercer." "Doesn't have to. You're trespassing. Leave." "We will. Once we see for ourselves that Miss Hale isn't hiding in your cabin." "And if we refuse?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then we'll have to insist." Rhea shifted her stance, subtle but deliberate. Caleb recognized it. She was getting ready for whatever came next. "Tell your boss," Rhea said, "that if he wants Marianne Hale, he can try the legal route. Lawyers, courts, the proper channels, but if he sends men with guns to terrorize homesteaders in the middle of the night, he's going to find out what happens when people stop being scared." The man's smile faded. "You're making a mistake." "I've made worse." They stared at each other, the distance between them charged with the possibility of violence. Finally, the man turned and walked back to his horse. "This isn't over," he called over his shoulder. "It is for tonight," Rhea said. The riders disappeared back into the darkness. Caleb and Rhea stood on the porch, watching the tree line, waiting for the trick, the ambush, the second wave. But nothing came. After an hour, Rhea finally lowered her rifle. "They'll be back." "When?" "Soon. Now that they know we're not going to cooperate, they'll change tactics. Caleb's legs felt shaky. Adrenaline was leaking out of him, leaving exhaustion in its wake. We can't do this alone. No, Rhea agreed. We can't. She looked at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw something like uncertainty in her face. Tomorrow, we go to the law. Get the sheriff involved. Make this official. Will he help? He will if we make enough noise. If we get the town talking, fear of scandal works as well as fear of bullets for some people. Caleb nodded. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. Better than waiting in the dark for the next attack. They went back inside. Rhea locked the door. Caleb fed more wood into the stove, needing something to do with his hands. Mercer, Rhea said. He turned. Thank you for not asking me to leave. The words caught him off guard. He'd expected a lot of things from her. Orders, plans, cold efficiency, not gratitude. You're helping someone I care about, he said. That's not nothing. You don't even know her, not really. I know enough. Rhea studied him in the firelight, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded and disappeared into her room. Caleb sat by the stove for a long time after that, thinking about Marianne, about the letters that had promised a different life, about the woman who'd ridden into his world like a storm and turned everything sideways. He'd wanted quiet. He'd gotten chaos. And the strangest part was, he wasn't sure which one he preferred anymore. Morning came too fast and brought no comfort with it. Caleb woke to the smell of coffee already brewing and found Rhea at the kitchen table, disassembling her revolver for the second time in as many days. She worked with mechanical precision, her fingers moving through the routine like prayer, except there was nothing holy about the way she checked each chamber, tested each spring. You sleep at all? He asked. Some. It was a lie. He could see it in the shadows under her eyes, the way her shoulders held tension like wire about to snap. But he didn't push. They'd crossed some threshold last night, standing together on that porch, and now they existed in a strange space where certain questions didn't get asked because the answers were already understood. He poured himself coffee and stood at the window, watching the sun crawl up over the hills. The ranch looked peaceful, deceptive, like the surface of a river that hid rocks underneath. We should leave within the hour, Rhea said, sliding the cylinder back into place with a click. Get to town before the sheriff can find an excuse to be unavailable. Henry's not the avoiding type. Every sheriff's the avoiding type when there's money involved, and men willing to spend it. Caleb turned from the window. You think they already got to him? I think it's stupid to assume they haven't tried. She had a point. Henry Tucker had been sheriff of Red Hollow for 8 years, and in that time, Caleb had watched him navigate the careful politics of a town where the biggest landowners thought they owned everything, including justice. Henry was honest enough, but honest men could still be persuaded when the persuasion came wrapped in legal language and campaign donations. They ate a cold breakfast of leftover cornbread and jerky, saddled the horses, and rode out as the morning light turned from gray to gold. Caleb kept his rifle across his saddle, and Rhea rode with her hand never far from her holster. Neither of them mentioned the possibility of ambush, but they both felt it, a weight pressing down on every mile. The road into town cut through open country where you could see trouble coming from a long way off. That was a comfort, small as it was. What worried Caleb more was what they'd find when they got there. Red Hollow was already awake by the time they arrived. The general store had customers going in and out. Children chased each other down the side streets, their laughter cutting through the morning quiet. Everything looked normal, but normal was just another kind of mask. They hitched their horses outside the sheriff's office, a squat building with barred windows and a door that had seen better days. Inside, they found Henry Tucker sitting behind a desk that was drowning in paperwork, a cup of coffee going cold at his elbow. Henry looked up when they entered, his expression shifting from bureaucratic boredom to something more complicated. He was a big man, gone soft around the middle, with a face that had probably been handsome 20 years ago. Now it just looked tired. Mercer, he said. Then his eyes moved to Rhea. Ma'am. Sheriff? Rhea didn't waste time on pleasantries. We need to file a complaint, trespassing and attempted intimidation. Henry set down the pen he'd been holding. That's so. 4 men came onto my property last night, Caleb said, armed, demanding entry to my home. When we refused, they made threats. What kind of threats? The kind that said they'd be back and we wouldn't like what happened next. Henry leaned back in his chair and it creaked under his weight. You get names? No. Descriptions? Caleb glanced at Rhea. She took over, her voice flat and precise. Leader was tall, maybe 6'2", beard gone mostly gray, wearing a brown duster and a hat with a silver band. Rode a bay gelding with a white blaze. The others stayed back in the shadows, but I counted 3 more. Maybe 4. That's pretty specific for shadows. I'm good at counting. Something flickered across Henry's face. Annoyance, maybe, or respect. Hard to tell. And what exactly did these men say they wanted? They were looking for someone, Caleb said. A woman named Marianne Hale. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Henry picked up his coffee, took a sip, made a face at how cold it had gotten, and set it back down. That the mail-order bride that was supposed to come in last week? She never arrived, Caleb said carefully. But these men seemed to think she did. And why would they think that? Because they intercepted her letters, Rhea said, and because they're looking for something she owns. Land with mineral rights, silver. Henry's expression hardened. That's a hell of an accusation. It's the truth. You have proof? I have a letter from Marianne explaining the situation, and I have the fact that 4 armed men showed up at Caleb's ranch in the middle of the night looking for her. But she's not there. No. So where is she? Rhea's jaw tightened. Somewhere safe. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. The tension in the room ratcheted up a notch. Caleb could feel it, could see it in the way Henry's hand flexed and relaxed on the desk, the way Rhea's weight shifted almost imperceptibly onto the balls of her feet. Look, Caleb said, stepping forward, we're not asking you to solve this whole mess. We're just asking you to do your job. Men trespassed on my land. They made threats. That's against the law, last I checked. Henry was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between them like he was calculating odds. Finally, he sighed. I'll look into it. That's it? What do you want me to say, Mercer? You're describing men I don't know, on a property 2 miles outside of town, making threats you can't prove. Even if I wanted to do something about it right now, what would that be? Ride out to every ranch in a 50-mile radius, asking if anyone's seen a tall man with a gray beard? You could start by asking around town, Rhea said. Strangers don't go unnoticed in a place this size. Someone's seen them. Someone knows where they're staying. And if I find them, then what? Arrest them for being strangers? Arrest them for trespassing. On Caleb's word against theirs? Rhea's eyes went cold. You saying you don't believe him? I'm saying the law needs more than belief. Henry stood up, and the chair scraped against the floor with a sound like teeth grinding. I'll ask around, see what I can find out. But I'm not making any promises. It wasn't good enough. Caleb could see it in the set of Rhea's shoulders, the way her hand drifted toward her gun without her even realizing it. He put a hand on her arm, light but firm. We appreciate whatever you can do, Henry. The sheriff nodded, already looking past them to the stack of paperwork waiting on his desk. They were being dismissed. Outside, the morning sun had burned off most of the chill, leaving behind a day that promised to be warm and clear. It felt wrong somehow, like the weather should match the dread sitting heavy in Caleb's chest. Rhea was already untying her horse, her movements sharp and angry. He's not going to do anything, she said. Maybe not. Definitely not. He's either scared or bought. Doesn't matter which. Caleb climbed into his saddle, settling his weight with the ease of long practice. So what now? Now we make sure the whole town knows what happened. Get people talking. Henry might not care about justice, but he cares about getting reelected. Public pressure works when the law won't. It wasn't a bad plan. Red Hollow ran on gossip the way some towns ran on water. If they could get the story out there, get people asking questions and demanding answers, Henry would have to do something or risk looking like he was in someone's pocket. They started at the general store. Tom Bridger was behind the counter, weighing out flour for a customer when they walked in. His eyes lit up when he saw them, the way they always did when fresh gossip walked through his door. Mercer, Miss Vance, what can I do for you? Need to buy some ammunition, Caleb said. 30-30 and 44. Tom's eyebrows went up. Planning on doing some hunting? Something like that. While Tom fetched the boxes from the back room, 3 more customers drifted over, drawn by the gravitational pull of potential news. Caleb recognized them all. Sarah Winters, who ran the boarding house, Jack Chen, who owned the livery, and Mary Hartwell, the school teacher. "Heard you had some excitement last night," Sarah said. She was a woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, the kind of person who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it. "Where'd you hear that?" Caleb asked. "Henry's deputy was in the office when you made your report. He mentioned it to his wife. She mentioned it to me." Of course she did. In Red Hollow, a secret had a half-life of about 20 minutes. "4 men came onto my property," Caleb said, pitching his voice so everyone could hear. "Armed, looking for someone who wasn't there. When I told them to leave, they threatened to come back." Mary Hartwell's hand went to her throat. "That's terrible. Did you recognize any of them?" "No, they were strangers." "Strangers?" Jack Chen frowned. "I haven't seen any new faces at the livery, and anyone riding through would have stopped to rest their horses." "Maybe they're camping outside of town," Sarah suggested, "out where people wouldn't notice." "Or maybe someone's putting them up," Rhea said quietly. "Someone with enough space and enough money to keep things quiet." That landed like a stone in still water. The implications rippled outward, and Caleb could see people starting to connect dots, make guesses about which of the big ranchers might be involved. Tom came back with the ammunition, and his expression had gone from curious to concerned. "You really think someone local is mixed up in this?" "I think men with guns don't appear out of nowhere," Rhea said. "And I think if the whole town knows what's happening, those men are going to have a harder time operating in the shadows." She was good at this, Caleb realized. Good at planting seeds, letting other people's imaginations do the work. By sunset, the story would have spread to every household, and by tomorrow, Henry Tucker would be fielding questions from half the town. They bought the ammunition, some extra supplies, and left the store knowing they'd accomplished what they'd come for. The story was out. Now they just had to wait and see if it made any difference. On the ride back to the ranch, Rio was quieter than usual. Caleb let the silence stretch for a while before finally breaking it. "You think it'll work?" "Maybe. Depends on how scared people are versus how curious." "And if it doesn't?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was flat. "Then we're on our own." They were halfway home when Caleb spotted the dust cloud rising from the south. His hand went to his rifle before he even thought about it. "Easy," Rhea said. "That's just one rider, moving fast." She was right. As they got closer, Caleb could make out the shape of a single horse and rider, pushing hard. Too hard for someone just passing through. The rider saw them and adjusted course, closing the distance at a gallop. As he got nearer, Caleb recognized him. Pete Morris, a ranch hand who worked for the Dalton spread, one of the bigger outfits north of town. Pete pulled his horse to a sliding stop, the animal lathered and blowing hard. "Mr. Mercer," he gasped. "Been looking for you." "What's wrong?" "It's the Dalton place. Someone burned down the east barn last night, killed 3 horses. Caleb's blood went cold. "Anyone hurt?" "No, thank heaven. But Mr. Dalton, he's saying it's a warning. Says there's been strangers asking questions about his property, about whether he's seen a woman fitting a certain description." Rhea's expression didn't change, but Caleb saw her hand tighten on the reins. "What did Dalton tell them?" "Told them to get off his land. Then the barn burned." "When?" "Just after midnight. By the time we got it under control, there was nothing left but ash and bones." The message was clear as daylight. These men weren't just looking for Marianne. They were making sure everyone understood the cost of getting in their way. "Where's Dalton now?" Caleb asked. "At his place, spitting mad and loading every gun he owns." Pete's eyes darted between them. "He told me to find you, said if they're coming after him because of questions about a woman, you need to know they're not playing around anymore." "We know," Rhea said quietly. Pete nodded, then wheeled his horse around and kicked it back into a gallop, heading north toward the Dalton spread. Caleb and Rhea sat there for a moment, the only sound the heavy breathing of their horses and the wind moving through the grass. "They're escalating," Caleb said. "They're getting desperate, which makes them more dangerous. Or more likely to make a mistake." "Maybe." Rhea turned her horse back toward the ranch. "Either way, we need to be ready. Because whatever comes next, it's coming soon." They made it back to the ranch just before noon. The place looked exactly as they'd left it, but Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The air felt heavier. The shadows looked darker. Maybe it was just knowing what had happened to the Dalton barn. What could happen to his own property if these men decided to make an example out of him too? Rhea dismounted and immediately started a perimeter check, walking the fence line, checking sight lines, making notes about what needed reinforcing. Caleb watched her for a minute, then went into the cabin and pulled out Mary Ann's letters. He'd read them so many times he practically had them memorized, but he read them again anyway, looking for something he'd missed. Some clue about who these men were or what they really wanted. One passage caught his attention, from a letter she'd written 2 months ago. My father always said the land would be worth something someday, but I don't think he understood what that would mean. Men look at you differently when they know you have something they want. They stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as an obstacle. She'd been living with this for months, maybe years, and she'd still taken the time to write to him, to build something careful and honest through letters, knowing the whole time that it might all come crashing down. The cabin door opened and Rhea came in, her boots tracking dust across the floor. "North fence has a weak section," she said, "and we should move the horses closer to the barn. Makes them harder to target if someone decides to try what they did to Dalton." "Already thinking about it." She nodded, then noticed the letters spread out on the table. Her expression softened, just barely. "Missing her?" "Didn't get the chance to miss her proper," Caleb said. "Never met her. Just knew the person in these letters, and now I'm starting to wonder if I ever really knew her at all." "You know the parts that matter, the parts she chose to show you. Is that enough?" Rhea was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. "I'm going to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." "Okay." Mary Ann knew this might happen, knew that writing to you, planning to come here, it could put you in danger. She almost didn't do it, almost called the whole thing off. Caleb's chest tightened. Why didn't she? Because she was tired of running, tired of being alone, and because she hoped, you might be the kind of man who'd understand that sometimes the right choice isn't the safe one. She was gambling with my life. She was gambling with both your lives. And you gambled right back when you agreed to marry someone you'd never met. Rhea leaned forward, her gray eyes holding his. Don't pretend this was one-sided. You wanted something too. Wanted it enough to take a risk. She was right, and Caleb hated that she was right. He'd convinced himself that he was being practical, that a mail-order bride was a sensible solution to loneliness. But the truth was messier than that. He'd been desperate enough to build a future with a stranger because the alternative, spending the rest of his life alone, was worse. "So what do I do with that?" he asked. "You decide if you're still willing to take the risk. Now that you know what it costs." Before Caleb could answer, the sound of hoofbeats cut through the afternoon quiet. Multiple riders, coming fast. They both moved at the same time, Rhea grabbing her rifle from where it leaned against the wall, Caleb reaching for his own. They positioned themselves at the windows, watching as 4 riders came into view. But these weren't the men from last night. These were townspeople. Caleb recognized them immediately. Jack Chen from the livery, Ben Yates, who owned the saloon, and 2 others, farmers whose names he couldn't quite remember. They pulled up in front of the cabin, and Jack dismounted first, his hands clearly visible and empty. "Mercer," he called. "We need to talk." Caleb exchanged a glance with Rhea, then stepped out onto the porch. "What's this about?" "This is about the trouble you've brought to Red Hollow." The words hit like a slap. Caleb kept his expression neutral. "I didn't bring anything. It came looking for me." "Doesn't matter how it started," Ben Yates said. He was a heavy man with a drinker's nose and the kind of voice that was used to being heard over bar noise. "What matters is, it's here now. Dalton's barn burned. People are scared. And it's all because of your mail-order bride situation." "She's not here," Caleb said. "I've told the sheriff. I've told anyone who asked. Whatever these men are looking for, they're not going to find it on my property." "Then maybe you should help them find it somewhere else," one of the farmers said. His name came back to Caleb suddenly. Frank Wilson, a man who'd never said more than 2 words to him in 5 years, now standing on his property, making demands. "Help them," Caleb repeated slowly. "You mean tell them where Mary Ann is?" "If it gets them out of our town." "Yes." Rhea stepped out onto the porch, her rifle cradled in her arms. "And what happens to her when these men find her?" "That's not our problem." "It's about to be." Rhea's voice was cold as winter. Because if you think giving them what they want will make them leave, you're stupider than you look. Men like that don't stop. They take and they take until someone makes them stop. We're not asking for your opinion, Ben said. Good, because I wasn't offering one. I was stating a fact. The tension crackled like static electricity before a storm. Jack Chen held up his hands, trying to play peacemaker. Look, we're not here to fight. We're here because we're worried about our families, our businesses. This town can't afford trouble. Neither can I, Caleb said. But I'm not going to throw an innocent woman to wolves just to make my life easier. Even if it means putting the whole town at risk? The town's not at risk because of me. It's at risk because you've got men willing to burn barns and kill horses, and your sheriff won't do anything about it. That hit a nerve. Caleb could see it in the way the men shifted in their saddles, exchanged glances. Henry's doing what he can, Frank said, but there was no conviction in it. Henry's doing nothing, Rhea countered, and you all know it. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of another rider approaching. This one was moving slower, more deliberate. When he came into view, Caleb's stomach sank. It was Henry Tucker. The sheriff rode up to the group and dismounted with a grunt, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. Not threatening exactly, but not friendly either. Gentlemen, he said, nodding at the men from town. Then his eyes moved to Caleb and Rhea. I hear you've been spreading stories. We've been telling the truth, Caleb said. Truth's subjective in times like these. Henry stepped closer to the porch. I've done some asking around, like I promised. Turns out there are 4 men staying at the old Brennan place, out past the Eastern Ridge. They paid cash for 3 weeks' rent and told Mrs. Brennan they were surveyors working for a mining company. And you believe that? Rhea asked. I believe that's what they told her. What they actually are is another question. Henry's expression was hard to read. I rode out there this morning, talked to them. They claim they're just doing their jobs, looking into mineral rights and property disputes. Said they've got legal documentation and everything. Legal documentation to trespass and threaten people? They deny the trespassing, say they never set foot on your property, Mercer. And without witnesses or proof, it's your word against theirs. Caleb felt anger rising in his chest, hot and sharp. So you're just going to let them keep doing whatever they want? I'm going to keep an eye on the situation, and I'm going to ask everyone involved to keep their heads and not do anything that might make this worse. Like burning barns? Jack asked. Henry's jaw tightened. I'm looking into that too. But starting a range war isn't going to help anybody. Nobody's starting anything, Caleb said. We're just defending what's ours. That's how it always starts. Henry looked at each of them in turn. I came out here to tell you what I found, and to give you some advice. These men have money and lawyers. They're not going away just because you want them to. So you've got 2 choices. Either cooperate with their investigation and let the law sort it out, or dig in and prepare for things to get a lot worse before they get better. Some choice, Rhea muttered. Henry shrugged. It's the one you've got. He climbed back on his horse and gestured to the men from town. Come on, we've said our piece. They left in a cloud of dust and unspoken threats, leaving Caleb and Rhea alone on the porch. The sun was starting its descent toward the western hills, painting everything in shades of amber and blood. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, and another answered. They're trying to isolate us, Rhea said quietly. Turn the town against us so we don't have any support when things get bad. It's working. Not yet it isn't. There are still people who haven't made up their minds. People who might help if we give them a reason to. Caleb turned to look at her. What kind of reason? The kind where we prove those men are lying, get evidence of what they're really doing, make it impossible for Henry to ignore. How? Rhea's smile was sharp and cold. We go to the Brennan place, tonight, see what these surveyors are really up to. It was a terrible idea, dangerous, possibly stupid, definitely illegal. And Caleb knew, even as he nodded in agreement, that they were crossing a line they couldn't uncross. But sometimes the only way forward was through the fire. They'd find out soon enough just how hot it burned. They waited until full dark before making their move. Caleb spent the hours between sunset and moonrise checking his weapons, oiling the action on his rifle until it moved smooth as water. He'd hunted coyotes and the occasional mountain lion that got too curious about his cattle, but he'd never pointed a gun at another human being, never wanted to. The weight of that potential sat heavy in his chest, making it hard to breathe right. Rhea moved through her own preparations with the kind of calm that came from repetition. She cleaned her revolver again, checked the loads in her rifle, tied back her hair tight enough that nothing would get in her eyes. When she caught him watching, she didn't smile or offer comfort, just went back to work. "You don't have to come," she said eventually, breaking the silence. "This is my fight more than yours. It became mine the moment those men showed up at my door. There's still time to walk away from it. Tell them where Marianne is. Let this play out somewhere else." Caleb set down the oilcloth he'd been using. "That really what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter. What matters is you understanding what you're getting into." She looked up at him then, and her eyes were hard. People die in fights like this. Good people. People who thought they were doing the right thing. And people who don't fight end up living with what they allowed to happen. That seems worse. Does it? Rhea's voice was quiet now, barely above a whisper. "You ever killed anyone, Mercer?" "No." "Then don't assume you know what's worse." The conversation died there, strangled by truths neither of them wanted to speak out loud. They finished their preparations in silence, and when the moon finally rose, thin and pale as a knife blade, they saddled their horses and rode east. The Brennan place sat about 5 miles outside of town, tucked into a fold of land where the valley started to climb toward the mountains. Old man Brennan had died 3 years back, and his widow had been renting out the property ever since, trying to scrape together enough money to keep the bank from taking it. The main house was small, but solid, and there were 2 outbuildings that had once been used for storage but now sat mostly empty. At least, that's what they were supposed to be. Caleb and Rhea left their horses tied in a stand of cottonwoods about a 1/4 mile out and covered the rest of the distance on foot. The night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky like thrown salt. Good visibility, which cut both ways. They could see the Brennan place from a distance, lamplight glowing in the windows, but that also meant anyone looking could see them coming. They moved slow and careful, staying low, using what cover the land offered. Rhea led the way, her movements so quiet that Caleb found himself straining to hear her footsteps. He did his best to match her pace, to place his boots where she placed hers, but he felt clumsy by comparison. A rancher, not a scout. When they got within 100 yards, they stopped behind an old collapsed fence and studied the property. The main house had lights and 2 windows. Shadows moved behind the curtains, people moving around inside. One of the outbuildings was dark, but the other had a lantern hanging by the door, and Caleb could see the shape of something large covered with canvas tarps. "That's not surveying equipment," he whispered. Rhea didn't answer right away. She was focused on the house, counting windows, marking exits. Finally, she nodded toward the lit outbuilding. "That's where we start. See what they're hiding. And if someone comes out, we move fast and quiet, and we don't get caught." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the one they had. They waited another 10 minutes, watching the patterns of movement in the house, waiting for a gap. When it came, they moved. The ground between the fence and the outbuilding felt like a mile, even though it couldn't have been more than 50 yards. Every step felt exposed, visible, wrong. Caleb's heart hammered so hard he was sure someone would hear it, but they made it to the building without raising an alarm, pressing themselves flat against the weathered wood siding. Rhea edged toward the door, testing the handle. Locked, but not well. She pulled a thin piece of metal from her pocket, worked it into the mechanism with practiced ease, and after a few seconds, the lock clicked open. "Where'd you learn that?" Caleb whispered. "Somewhere you don't want to know about." She eased the door open just wide enough to slip through, and Caleb followed. Inside, the building smelled like grease and gunpowder. The lantern light from outside filtered through cracks in the walls, giving just enough illumination to see by. What they saw made Caleb's blood run cold. The canvas tarps covered crates. Dozens of them, stacked in careful rows. Rhea pulled back one corner of a tarp and used her knife to pry open the nearest crate. Inside, packed in straw, were rifles. New ones, still in their factory grease. "That's enough weapons to arm a small army," Caleb said. Rhea moved to another crate, opened it. More rifles. The next one had ammunition, boxes and boxes of it. A third held something wrapped in oilcloth that she unwrapped carefully. "Dynamite. These aren't surveyors," Rhea said, and there was something in her voice that Caleb had never heard before. Not fear exactly. More like recognition. "They're planning a war. Over silver rights? Over whatever it takes to get them. She started rewrapping the dynamite, her hands moving quickly. "We need to get out of here. Now! We've seen enough." But before they could move, voices cut through the night. Close. Too close. Caleb and Rhea froze. Through the gaps in the wall, they could see two men approaching the outbuilding, talking in low tones. One of them was the bearded man who'd come to Caleb's ranch. The other was younger, lean, and dangerous looking. "Check the lock," the bearded man said. "Johnson swore he secured it, but I don't trust him worth a damn." Footsteps crunched on gravel, coming straight for the door. Rhea's hand went to her gun, but Caleb grabbed her wrist, shook his head. If they drew weapons now, this would end in gunfire, and gunfire would bring everyone running. They needed another way. The building had a back wall that looked out on empty land. No door, but there was a gap where two boards had rotted through, just wide enough for someone to squeeze through if they didn't mind splinters and torn clothes. Caleb pointed. Rhea saw it, nodded. They moved as the door handle rattled. "It's open," the younger man said, suspicion sharpening his voice. "I thought you said it was locked." "It was supposed to be." The door swung inward. Lamplight flooded the space. Caleb had just enough time to throw himself through the gap in the wall, Rhea right behind him, before the men stepped inside. They landed hard on the other side, the impact driving the air from Caleb's lungs. Rhea was already moving, pulling him to his feet, dragging him toward the darkness beyond the building. Behind them, voices rose in alarm. "Someone's been in here! Check the house, now!" They ran, not toward their horses. That would be the obvious move, and these men weren't stupid. Instead, Rhea led them east, toward the rough country where the land started to climb. It was harder terrain, but that meant better places to hide. Shouts erupted from the Brennan place. More lights came on. Caleb heard the sound of men mounting horses, dogs starting to bark. The alarm had been raised, and now they had to stay ahead of it. They scrambled up a rocky slope, using their hands as much as their feet, moving by feel as much as sight. At the top, Rhea pulled them both down behind a jumble of boulders and pressed a finger to her lips. Below, men were spreading out, searching the immediate area around the outbuilding. Someone had brought torches, and the flickering light threw wild shadows across the ground. "Fan out!" the bearded man shouted. "They can't have gone far!" But they had. Just far enough that the darkness and the terrain made finding them more trouble than it was worth. The searchers moved in patterns, checking the obvious hiding spots, calling out to each other. After 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours, the bearded man called them back. "Forget it. Whoever it was, they're gone. But they've seen too much." His voice carried clearly in the night air. "Send word to Coleman. Tell him we're moving up the timeline. We hit Mercer's place tomorrow night." Tomorrow night. Caleb's chest tightened. They'd come looking for evidence, and instead they'd painted a target on his back that couldn't be erased. The men below started filing back toward the house, their voices fading. Caleb and Rhea waited another full hour before moving, making absolutely certain the search had ended. When they finally started working their way back to where they'd left the horses, the moon had climbed high and cold. Neither of them spoke until they were mounted and moving, putting distance between themselves and the Brennan place. "Coleman," Caleb said finally. "You know that name?" "No, but he's the one calling the shots." Rhea's face was grim in the moonlight. And if they're moving up their timeline, it means they're getting desperate, or they've decided subtlety isn't working. "What do we do?" "We get ready, shore up your defenses, gather anyone who'll stand with us." She paused. "And we accept that tomorrow night people are probably going to die." The ride back to the ranch passed in tense silence. Caleb's mind was racing, trying to think through scenarios, options, ways this could end that didn't involve bloodshed. He came up empty every time. When they finally made it home, the eastern sky was just starting to lighten, that pre-dawn gray that meant morning was coming whether you were ready for it or not. They put the horses away, and Caleb started making coffee, while Rhea spread out a rough map of the ranch on the kitchen table, marking positions and angles with a piece of charcoal. "The house is defensible," she said, thinking out loud. "Stone foundation, thick walls, but we can't defend the whole property. They'll try to burn us out or pin us down until we run out of ammunition. Unless we don't let them get that far." She looked up. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking they expect us to ford up, wait for them to come to us. What if we don't? You want to take the fight to them?" "I want to control where the fight happens. Choose ground that favors us, not them." Rhea studied him for a moment, and something that might have been respect flickered across her face. You've been thinking about this. Hard not to. All right, show me. They spent the next hour going over the land, talking through possibilities. There was a narrow pass about a quarter-mile from the ranch house where the road cut through a rocky section. Good place for an ambush if you were willing to risk it. The creek bed offered cover, but also limited mobility. The barn had sight lines, but was too exposed. By the time the sun came up proper, they had something that resembled a plan. It wasn't perfect, had about a dozen ways it could go wrong, but it was better than nothing. Caleb rode into town at mid-morning, alone this time. Rhea stayed at the ranch, preparing defenses, moving supplies to strategic positions. If tonight went bad, they'd need every advantage they could scrape together. Red Hollow was quiet when he arrived, the kind of quiet that felt wrong. People were moving around doing their business, but there was a tension underneath it all. Folks saw him coming and found reasons to cross to the other side of the street. No one wanted to be associated with trouble. He found Tom Bridger in the general store, sweeping the floor with more energy than it needed. Tom. The storekeeper looked up, and his expression went carefully neutral. Mercer. Need to ask you something. Not sure I can help you. Haven't asked yet. Tom set the broom aside with a sigh. Look, Caleb, you seem like a decent enough fellow, but what you're mixed up in, that's your business. I've got a store to run and a family to think about. I know, and I'm not asking you to fight. I'm asking you to do what you do best. Which is? Talk. Spread the word. There are weapons stockpiled at the Brennan place. Enough to arm 30 men. Dynamite, too. Those surveyors everyone's so willing to give the benefit of the doubt? They're planning something, and it's not legal mineral surveys. Tom's eyes narrowed. You saw this yourself? Last night, Rhea and I both. And you're still alive? Barely. But we saw enough to know this isn't about Marianne anymore. It's bigger than that. These men are planning something that's going to hurt this town, whether folks want to admit it or not. Tom was quiet for a long moment, chewing on that. Finally, he nodded. I'll spread the word. But Caleb, even if people believe you, I don't know if they'll help. Fear makes folks selfish. I know. But maybe if enough people know what's coming, Henry will have to do something. Henry's already made his choice, seems to me. Then maybe it's time we make ours. Caleb left the store and headed for the sheriff's office. He didn't expect much from Henry Tucker, but he had to try. Had to give the law one more chance to do its job before things went completely sideways. Henry was at his desk, same as always, drowning in paperwork that probably didn't matter half as much as he pretended it did. Mercer. Henry didn't look up. Come to confess to trespassing on the Brennan property? So word had already gotten back to him. Caleb shouldn't have been surprised. Come to report what we found. Weapons, ammunition, enough to outfit a militia. Those men aren't surveyors, Henry. They're planning an attack. On who? On me. Tonight, from what we overheard. Henry finally looked up, and his expression was tired. Not surprised, just tired. And how exactly did you come by this information? Does it matter? In a court of law? Yes. Evidence obtained through illegal means isn't admissible. We're not in a courtroom. We're in your office, and I'm telling you that people are going to get hurt if you don't do something. Henry leaned back in his chair, and it creaked like old bones. What do you want me to do, Caleb? Ride out to the Brennan place with my deputy and demand to search the property based on the word of two people who were trespassing? Mrs. Brennan would refuse, those men would refuse, and I'd have no legal grounds to push the issue. So you're just going to let it happen? I'm going to wait for actual evidence of a crime being committed. Not planned, committed. Henry's voice hardened. You want my advice? Leave, tonight. Take Miss Vance and ride out. Come back in a week when this is blown over. And if it doesn't blow over, if they burn my ranch the way they burned Dalton's barn, then I'll investigate it proper. With evidence, with witnesses, the right way. Caleb felt something break inside him, some last fragile hope that the system might actually work. The right way gets people killed. So does vigilante justice. There was nothing more to say. Caleb turned and walked out, leaving Henry Tucker to his paperwork and his excuses. Outside, the day had turned warm, the kind of early autumn warmth that wouldn't last much longer. Caleb stood on the boardwalk looking at the town he'd called home for 5 years, and wondered how many of these people would care if he died tonight. How many would even notice? Mr. Mercer. He turned. Sarah Winters stood behind him, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Winters, I heard what you told Tom about the weapons. Word travels fast. It does in a small town. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. My husband died 10 years ago. Left me the boarding house and not much else. I've run it alone ever since, and in that time I've seen a lot of men come through. Some good, some bad, most somewhere in between. Caleb waited. She was building to something. Those 4 men staying at the Brennan place, they came through town first, stayed at my boarding house for 2 nights before they moved out there, and I saw things, heard things. What kind of things? Maps. Not survey maps. Property maps with names and boundaries marked. They were talking about claims and deeds and how to make certain purchases look legal when they weren't. She paused. And one of them had a letter. I saw it on the table when I was cleaning. It was addressed to someone named Coleman at a Denver law firm. Coleman. The name the bearded man had mentioned last night. You remember the firm's name? Coleman and Strauss. Big operation, from what I understand. Handles mining contracts and land disputes. Caleb's mind was racing. If these men were working for a law firm, that meant this wasn't just about thugs and threats. This was organized, funded, professional. Why are you telling me this? Sarah's expression softened slightly. Because I've lived in Red Hollow my whole life, and I'm tired of watching good people get run over by folks with more money and less conscience. You might not win this fight, Mr. Mercer, but at least you're fighting it. She turned and walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing there with one more piece of a puzzle he still didn't fully understand. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than usual, maybe because Caleb knew what was waiting at the end of it. Not home, not safety, just a countdown to violence. When he arrived, he found Rhea in the barn, reinforcing the door with extra boards and creating firing positions in the loft. How'd it go? She asked without stopping her work. About as expected. Henry won't help. Tom's spreading the word, but I don't think it'll matter. Most people are too scared to get involved. Can't blame them. I can blame Henry. Rhea hammered in another nail. Law doesn't work the same when money's involved. Never has. Mrs. Winters gave me information. Those men are working for a Denver law firm, Coleman and Strauss. That made Rhea pause. She climbed down from the loft, wiping sweat from her forehead. That's bigger than I thought. How much bigger? Big enough that even if we survive tonight, this doesn't end. They'll just send more men, better men, keep coming until they get what they want. The word should have been discouraging, but instead Caleb felt a strange kind of clarity settle over him. Then we need to make sure tonight costs them so much they decide Marianne's land isn't worth it. That's a hell of a gamble. Everything about this is a gamble. Caleb looked around at his ranch, at the life he'd built with his own hands. But I'm tired of playing defense. Tonight, we hit them first. They spent the rest of the day preparing, moving ammunition to strategic positions, setting up fallback points, creating obstacles and traps along the approach roads. It was brutal, exhausting work, and by the time the sun started sinking toward the horizon, they were both running on nothing but adrenaline and stubbornness. As twilight deepened into dusk, they took positions in the barn loft, rifles ready, watching the road. You scared? Rhea asked quietly. Terrified. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. It's when you stop being scared that you make mistakes. Caleb glanced at her. In the fading light, her face looked carved from stone, all hard angles and old scars. You ever regret it? The life you've lived? Every day. She didn't elaborate, and he didn't push. They sat in silence as the last light bled from the sky and stars began to emerge. The ranch settled into its night rhythms, familiar and false. Somewhere out there, men were coming. Men with guns and bad intentions, and the kind of certainty that came from always getting what they wanted. But tonight, Caleb Mercer wasn't alone. And maybe that would be enough. The first sign of trouble came just after full dark. Not the thunder of approaching horses, but something quieter. Movement in the shadows beyond the fence line. Figures spreading out, taking positions. They're here, Rhea whispered. Caleb's grip tightened on his rifle. His mouth had gone dry, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. The moment when everything either held together or fell apart. A voice cut through the darkness, the bearded man from before, his tone almost conversational. Mercer, we know you're in there. We're not here to hurt you, just want to have a conversation. Caleb didn't respond, Words were a trap now, a way to buy time or reveal positions. Come on now, let's be reasonable. You give us what we want, we leave you in peace. Nobody has to get hurt. Still nothing. The silence stretched out, taut as wire. Then, without warning, a shot rang out. The bullet smashed into the barn wall, splintering wood just above Caleb's head. "That was your warning," the bearded man shouted. "Next one won't miss." Rhea's hand found Caleb's in the darkness, squeezed once. Not comfort, a signal. Then she stood and fired. The night exploded into chaos. Rhea's shot took the bearded man in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He went down with a curse that turned into a roar of pain and fury, and then hell opened up. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. Bullets tore through the air with sounds like angry hornets, punching into wood, ricocheting off stone, kicking up dirt. Caleb pressed himself flat against the barn loft floor, his heart trying to climb out through his throat. The noise was overwhelming, disorienting, nothing like shooting at targets or coyotes. This was chaos made of gunpowder and rage. "Stay low!" Rhea shouted over the din, already working the lever on her rifle, firing again. "Count your shots!" Caleb forced himself to breathe, to think. He rose just enough to sight down his rifle, found a shape moving in the darkness near the fence line, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed into his shoulder. He had no idea if he'd hit anything, but the shape dropped and didn't get back up. The return fire intensified. Someone had a repeating rifle and was using it to chew through the barn wall like it was made of paper. Wood exploded in showers of splinters. Dust filled the air, making it hard to see, harder to breathe. "We can't stay here," Caleb yelled. "Fall back to the house. Go!" They scrambled down from the loft, half sliding down the ladder, and burst out through the barn's back door just as something heavy slammed into the front. Someone was trying to break in, probably thinking they were still up in the loft. The distance between the barn and the house was maybe 30 yards. Might as well have been a mile. They ran, staying low, zigzagging like Rhea had taught him earlier. Bullets kicked up dirt at their heels. Something tugged at Caleb's sleeve, hot and sharp, but he didn't stop to check if he'd been hit. They hit the porch at full speed and crashed through the door. Rhea slammed it shut behind them and threw the heavy wooden bar across it. The windows already had shutters closed, gun ports cut into them at strategic heights. This was their fortress now, and they'd either hold it or die trying. "You hit?" Rhea demanded, checking him over with quick, efficient hands. "Don't think so. You?" "No." Outside, the shooting had slowed. Voices called out to each other, coordinating. These weren't random thugs. They knew what they were doing, how to move as a unit. Military training, maybe, or just enough experience that it amounted to the same thing. Caleb moved to one of the gun ports and peered out. In the moonlight, he could count at least 6 shapes spread out in a loose semicircle around the house. The bearded man was being dragged back toward cover, still cursing. That was one down, but not out of the fight. "How much ammunition do we have?" he asked. Rhea was already checking. "Maybe 100 rounds between the two of us. More than them, probably, but not by much. And they know we can't stay here forever. They also know we can make it expensive for them to dig us out." A new voice cut through the night, younger than the bearded man's, with an edge of educated authority that stood out against the rough company he kept. "Mercer, this doesn't have to continue. We're prepared to offer you compensation for your trouble. Substantial compensation. Enough to buy a new ranch anywhere you want. All we need is information about Marianne Hale's whereabouts, and this ends." Caleb glanced at Rhea. She was already shaking her head. "Don't," she said quietly. "They're trying to give you an out that sounds reasonable. Make you second-guess yourself. What if I tell them she's in Colorado, that she never came here? They won't believe you, and even if they did, they'd still kill us. We've seen too much." She was right. The moment they'd broken into that outbuilding at the Brennan place, they'd crossed a line. These men couldn't afford to leave witnesses who knew about the weapons cache, the plan, the connection to Coleman and Strauss. "We're not interested," Caleb shouted back. A long silence followed. Then the same voice, colder now. "Then you've chosen poorly." The attack resumed, but different this time, more methodical. They weren't trying to overwhelm with volume of fire. They were probing, testing the defenses, looking for weak points. A shot would come from one direction, draw return fire, then go quiet while another position opened up. Caleb found himself settling into a rhythm he'd never wanted to learn. Watch. Wait. Breathe. Fire only when you had a clear target. Conserve ammunition. Don't panic. An hour passed. Then another. The moon climbed higher, painting everything in silver and shadow. Caleb's shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil. His ears rang from the gunfire. His mouth tasted like copper and fear. During a lull in the shooting, Rhea moved to the water bucket and drank deeply, then brought Caleb a dipper. "They're waiting us out," she said. "How long can they wait?" "Long as they need to." "They've got supplies. Reinforcements they can call in. We've got what's in this house and nothing else." Caleb drank, the water cold and good against his dry throat. "So what's our play?" "We wait for dawn. Hope someone in town heard the shooting and has the sense to come investigate. Or we try to break out, make a run for it." "That's suicide." "Maybe, but staying here guarantees we lose eventually. At least running gives us a chance." Before Caleb could respond, a new sound cut through the night. Not gunfire, hoofbeats, multiple horses, coming fast from the direction of town. The shooting stopped abruptly. Confused shouts rose from the men surrounding the house. Caleb risked a look through the gun port and saw the attackers turning, caught between their assault on the house and whatever was approaching. The riders came into view, maybe a dozen of them, and Caleb's heart sank. Reinforcements. They'd called in more men, and now he and Rhea were truly finished. But then he recognized the lead rider, Tom Bridger. Behind him came Jack Chen, Ben Yates, Frank Wilson, and others. Even Sarah Winters, riding side saddle with a shotgun across her lap. The people of Red Hollow, armed and angry, and apparently done with staying neutral. "What in the hell?" one of the attackers shouted. "Is this?" Tom pulled his horse to a stop just outside the circle of violence. Close enough to be heard, but far enough to have room to maneuver if things went bad. When he spoke, his voice carried clear and hard. "This is us deciding we've had enough. You want to terrorize our neighbors, burn barns, shoot up homesteads, you're going to have to go through all of us." The younger voice from before, the educated one, took on a placating tone. "These people are harboring a fugitive. We have every legal right to—" "You've got no rights here." Sarah Winters cut him off, and even from inside the house, Caleb could hear the steel in her voice. "I know who you work for, Coleman and Strauss. I know what you're after, and I know you've got no legal claim to anything in this valley. This is none of your concern, madam. It became my concern when you started treating Red Hollow like your personal hunting ground." She raised her shotgun, not quite pointing it at anyone, but making it clear she could change that in a heartbeat. "You've got one chance to leave peacefully. After that, we stop being polite." For a long moment, nobody moved. The standoff hung there in the moonlight, balanced on a knife's edge. Caleb could see the bearded man, wounded and furious, arguing with someone Caleb couldn't see clearly. The educated voice spoke again, quieter now, conferring with his men. Finally, he called out, "We'll withdraw for now, but this isn't over. We have legal recourse. We'll be back with proper authority." "You do that," Tom said, "and we'll be waiting." Slowly, carefully, the attackers pulled back. They gathered their wounded, retrieved what equipment they could, and withdrew toward the road. But they didn't go far. Caleb could see them regrouping about a quarter-mile out, just visible in the darkness. "They're not leaving," Rhea observed. "No, but they're not attacking either." The people from town dismounted and approached the house cautiously. Caleb and Rhea emerged onto the porch, weapons still ready, but lowered. The relief Caleb felt was so intense it made his knees weak. Tom was the first to speak. "You all right?" "We're alive," Caleb said. "That's more than I expected an hour ago." "Yeah, well..." Tom looked embarrassed, almost angry at himself. "We heard the shooting, sat in our houses listening to it, telling ourselves it wasn't our problem. Then Sarah came banging on doors, calling us cowards, asking what kind of people we'd become if we let our neighbors get murdered over land we didn't even own." Sarah herself stepped forward. "I may have been less diplomatic than that." "You shamed us," Jack Chen said quietly. "And you were right to." Ben Yates cleared his throat. "We can't stay here all night. Some of us have businesses to run, families to get back to. But we can take shifts, keep watch. Make sure those bastards know they're outnumbered." It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was something, more than Caleb had dared hope for. "There's something else you should know," Caleb said. He explained about the weapons cache at the Brennan place. the connection to the Denver law firm, the scope of what they were really dealing with. As he talked, he watched the faces of the townspeople shift from determination to concern to something harder. "They're going to try again," Frank Wilson said when Caleb finished. "Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but they will." "Not if we get ahead of them," Rhea said. She'd been quiet until now, standing in the shadows of the porch. "Those weapons are evidence of intent. If we can get them into the right hands, show them to someone who actually cares about the law, we can shut this down." "Henry won't do anything," Tom said bitterly. "We all know that now." "Then we go over his head. State marshal. Maybe even federal if we can prove this crosses state lines." Sarah was nodding slowly. "Coleman and Strauss operates out of Denver. That's interstate commerce, potentially. Mail fraud if they've been using the postal system to coordinate their scheme. That brings in federal jurisdiction." "How do you know all this?" Caleb asked. "My late husband was a lawyer before he bought the boarding house. I learned a few things." She looked at Rhea with new respect. "You're right. We need to make this bigger than Red Hollow. Make it impossible to sweep under the rug." "But first we need to survive until morning," Jack pointed out. "Those men out there aren't going to sit quiet forever." They organized themselves into a watch rotation. Half the group would stay at the ranch, positioned around the property to prevent another attack. The other half would ride back to town, spread the word about what was happening, and start drafting messages to law enforcement authorities who might actually care. As the town riders prepared to leave, Tom pulled Caleb aside. "I'm sorry," he said, "for hesitating, for not believing you sooner. You came when it mattered. That's what counts." "Still." Tom looked out at the darkness where the attackers waited. "This isn't over, is it?" "No, but now we've got a chance." After the others left, Caleb and Rhea joined the remaining townspeople in setting up a proper perimeter. It was strange working alongside people who'd avoided him just days ago, but shared danger had a way of erasing old boundaries. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, turning it from black to gray to pale gold, Caleb found himself standing watch with Sarah Winters. She held her shotgun with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Mrs. Brennan came to see me last night," she said without preamble. "After those men cleared out of her property. She's scared. Says they threatened her, told her if she talked to anyone about what she'd seen, they'd burn her house down with her in it." "Did she talk anyway?" "She told me where they're keeping their records. Documents, contracts, correspondence with Coleman and Strauss. Everything they'd need if this land grab went legal." Sarah's smile was grim. "She's a frightened old woman, but she's not a fool. She made copies before they noticed." Caleb's heart jumped. "Where are they?" "Hidden in town. Somewhere safe. She'll turn them over, but only to someone who can guarantee her protection. Federal marshal could do that. That's what I told her." Sarah shifted her weight, and her expression softened slightly. "Your bride, Mary Ann. She's really in danger?" "Yes. And you've never even met her?" "No. But you're willing to die for her." Caleb thought about that. About letters written by someone he'd never seen, promises made across distance, hope invested in the possibility of partnership with a stranger. "I'm not dying for her," he said finally. "I'm dying against the idea that men with money and guns get to take whatever they want just because they can. Mary Ann's the reason it started, but it's bigger than that now." Sarah nodded slowly. "Good answer." The sun continued its climb, burning away the last shadows of night. The men who'd attacked the ranch were still visible in the distance, but they'd pulled back even further, establishing their own camp, waiting, just like Caleb and the others were waiting. Around mid-morning, a rider approached from town, not one of the attackers. This one flew a white cloth tied to a stick, a flag of truce. The rider pulled up at a respectful distance and called out, "I've got a message from Henry Tucker. Says he needs to speak with Caleb Mercer. Official business." Caleb exchanged glances with Rhea. "Could be a trap." "Could be. Or maybe Henry's finally decided which side he's on." They let the messenger approach. He was young, couldn't have been more than 20, and he looked nervous enough that Caleb believed he was just doing what he'd been told. The message was simple. Henry wanted Caleb to come to town for a meeting. Neutral ground. The church, since nobody would start trouble in a house of worship. "He's stalling," Rhea said after the messenger left. "Trying to buy time for something. Or trying to find a way out of this that doesn't involve choosing sides." "Same thing," Caleb was tired, bone tired, soul tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from living on adrenaline and fear for too long. But he recognized an opportunity when he saw one. "I'll go, but not alone." "Damn right not alone." They rode into town with 4 others, leaving the rest to guard the ranch. The streets of Red Hollow were busier than usual, people standing in clusters, talking in low voices. Everyone knew something was happening. The only question was whether they'd end up on the right side of it. The church sat at the north end of town, a simple white building with a steeple that had seen better days. Henry Tucker's horse was tied outside, along with 3 others that Caleb didn't recognize. Inside, the church was dim and cool, sunlight filtering through plain glass windows. Henry stood near the pulpit, his hat in his hands, looking older than he had just days ago. With him were 3 men in suits, and Caleb's stomach dropped when he recognized the type. Lawyers. "Mercer," Henry said. "Thanks for coming. Didn't seem like I had much choice." "You always have a choice. That's what this is about." Henry gestured to the suited men. "These gentlemen represent Coleman and Strauss. They've come with an offer." The tallest of the 3 lawyers stepped forward. He was maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "Mr. Mercer, my name is Edmund Strauss. I believe you've met some of my associates, though perhaps under less than ideal circumstances. Your associates tried to kill me last night. A regrettable misunderstanding. My men were operating under the impression that you were harboring Miss Hale against her will. When you refused to cooperate, they made certain assumptions. Assumptions that involved bullets." Strauss's smile never wavered. "As I said, regrettable. But we're here now to resolve this peacefully. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer for any information you have regarding Miss Hale's current location." "I don't know where she is." "Come now, Mr. Mercer. She was corresponding with you for months, planning to marry you. Surely she must have contacted you, told you where she went when she failed to arrive." "She sent someone to warn me. That's all I know." Strauss's eyes flicked to Rhea, who stood slightly behind Caleb, her hand resting casually near her gun. "Ah, yes, Miss Vance. We've heard about you as well. Former Pinkerton, if our information is correct. Discharged for excessive force during a labor dispute in Colorado." Rhea's expression didn't change. "Your information's only half right. I left the Pinkertons. They didn't discharge me. Semantics." Strauss turned back to Caleb. "The point is, you're both involved in something far larger than you understand. Coleman and Strauss represents legitimate business interests. We have legal claim to the mineral rights on Miss Hale's property, purchased from her late father years ago. She's refusing to honor that contract. If it's legitimate, take it to court. We intend to, but first we need to serve her the appropriate papers, which requires knowing where she is." Strauss pulled a document from his coat pocket. "This is a contract. You tell us where to find Marianne Hale, and we'll pay you $10,000, enough to start over anywhere you choose, all legal, all above board." $10,000. Caleb had never seen that much money in his life. Could probably work his ranch for 20 years and not clear that much profit. "And if I don't know where she is?" "Then we'll assume you're lying, and our business here becomes significantly more complicated." The threat was clear, even wrapped in lawyer speak. Caleb looked at Henry, who was staring at the floor like he wished it would open up and swallow him. "You brought me here for this?" Caleb asked. "To sell out someone I've never even met?" "I brought you here to give you a way out," Henry said quietly. "These men have resources, connections. They're not going away just because you want them to. Neither am I. Caleb, don't be stupid. Take the money, walk away, live to fight another day." "Fight what?" "I walk away from this. I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I let them win because I was too scared to stand up." Strauss's smile finally faded. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Good." The lawyer's jaw tightened. "We can make your life very difficult, Mr. Mercer. Legally difficult. We have friends in the territorial government, judges who owe us favors. We can tie up your land in litigation for years, bleed you dry with legal fees, make it so you can't sell, can't borrow, can't do anything but watch your ranch crumble around you. Then I guess I'll learn to live with crumbling. You're a fool." "Maybe, but I'm a fool who can still look at himself in the mirror." Strauss snapped his fingers, and one of the other lawyers handed him another document. This is a court order freezing all financial transactions related to your property, pending investigation into your harboring of a fugitive from legal process, signed by Judge Carver in the territorial capital, effective immediately. The paper felt heavy in Caleb's hands. Official stamps, legal language he barely understood, but the meaning was clear enough. They were going to strangle him slowly, legally, until he gave them what they wanted or lost everything trying to resist. "You can't do this," Rhea said, her voice cold. "We just did." Strauss collected the papers and tucked them back into his coat. "You have 48 hours to reconsider our offer. After that, we proceed with full legal action. And Mr. Mercer, I should mention that we've also filed complaints about last night's incident. Self-defense is one thing. Assault with deadly weapons is another. The territorial marshal will be very interested in hearing about armed insurrection against lawful business representatives. They walked out of the church like they owned it, like they owned everything, and maybe they did." Caleb stood there, the court order still in his hand, feeling the walls closing in. Henry finally looked up. "I'm sorry. I tried to warn you this was bigger than you thought. You could have helped." "Help you do what? Get yourself killed? Sometimes the smart thing is knowing when you're beat. And sometimes," Rhea said quietly, "the smart thing is burning it all down rather than letting them take it piece by piece." She walked out, and after a moment Caleb followed. Outside, the sun was bright and merciless. The town looked the same as always, but Caleb saw it differently now. Saw how fragile it all was, how easily power could twist things, make wrong look right, and right look criminal. The others were waiting by the horses. Tom took one look at Caleb's face and knew. Bad? Worse than bad. Caleb explained about the court order, the threats, the 48-hour ultimatum. As he talked, he watched hope drain from the faces around him. These were practical people. They understood odds, and these odds were impossible. "So what do we do?" Jack asked. Caleb looked at Rhea. She was staring off toward the mountains, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "We go get those documents from Mrs. Brennan, the evidence of what Coleman and Strauss is really doing, and we ride to the territorial capital. File our own complaints. Show the marshal and anyone else who'll listen that this isn't about legal contracts. It's about powerful men breaking the law and hiding behind it." "That's a 3-day ride," Frank pointed out. "And Strauss's men will be watching. They'll stop us before we get 10 miles. Not if we split up, create diversions, make them chase shadows while the real evidence gets through." It was desperate, probably stupid, but it was the only move they had left. "I'll go," Caleb said. "It's my fight." "No." Sarah Winters stepped forward. "It's all our fight now, and I'm going with you. An old woman and a rancher heading to the capital to visit family won't draw nearly as much attention as armed men riding hard." She had a point. Caleb hated that she had a point, hated putting her in danger, but she was right. "I'll create the diversion," Rhea said. "Draw their attention back to the ranch. Make them think that's where you are." "That's suicide." "Not if I'm smart about it, and I'm very good at being smart about staying alive." They planned it quickly, knowing that the longer they waited, the more time Strauss had to prepare. Mrs. Brennan would be brought to the church quietly, hand over the documents, and then Sarah and Caleb would leave town heading north as if visiting the Henderson Ranch. Once they were clear, they'd circle around and make for the capital. Meanwhile, Rhea and the others would return to Caleb's ranch, make it look occupied and defended, keep Strauss's men focused there instead of watching the roads. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was what they had. They moved fast. Within 2 hours, Caleb and Sarah were on the road, documents hidden in a false bottom of Sarah's travel bag, moving at a pace that looked casual but covered ground steadily. Behind them, Red Hollow grew smaller in the distance. And ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon, waited something that might be justice or might be just another version of the same corruption they were running from. But at least they were running towards something instead of just away. At least they were trying. The first day on the road passed without incident, which made Caleb more nervous than if they'd been chased from the start. Sarah kept up a steady stream of conversation about weather and crops and the fictional family they were supposedly visiting, playing her part so well that even Caleb almost believed it. But underneath the pleasant talk, they both knew what they were carrying and what it would cost if they failed. They made camp that first night in a grove of cottonwoods near a creek, keeping their fire small and their voices lower. Sarah proved surprisingly capable at trail cooking, producing a meal of beans and salt pork that tasted better than it had any right to. My husband taught me, she said when Caleb commented on it. He believed a woman should be able to take care of herself in any situation. Used to drive his mother crazy. Sounds like a smart man. He was. Stubborn as a mule, but smart. She poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks drifting into the darkness. He died trying to help someone. Got between a drunk cowhand and the man's wife during a dispute. Took a knife meant for her. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. I used to be angry about it, Sarah continued. Thought he was a fool for getting involved in something that wasn't his business. But over the years, I've come to understand it differently. He couldn't live with himself if he'd walked away. Some people are built that way. Is that why you're here? She smiled, and in the firelight she looked younger than her years. Partly. Also because I'm tired of watching powerful people treat the rest of us like we don't matter. Gets old after a while. They took turns sleeping, one keeping watch while the other rested. When Caleb's turn came to sleep, he found it difficult. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. But exhaustion eventually dragged him under, and when Sarah shook him awake for his watch shift, he felt like he'd barely closed his eyes. The second day was harder. The road took them through increasingly rough country, and they had to slow their pace to navigate rocky stretches that could break a horse's leg if they weren't careful. Around midday, they spotted riders in the distance, too far away to identify but close enough to worry about. Keep steady, Sarah murmured. We're just travelers. Nothing interesting. The riders passed without approaching, but Caleb's hand didn't leave his rifle for an hour after they disappeared from view. By the third day, they were both exhausted and filthy, the initial tension giving way to a kind of numb determination. The territorial capital rose on the horizon like a promise. Buildings clustered around the river, bigger and more bustling than Red Hollow could ever dream of being. They rode straight to the marshal's office, a sturdy brick building near the center of town. Inside, a deputy looked up from his desk with the bored expression of someone who dealt with complaints and problems all day, every day. Help you? We need to see the territorial marshal, Caleb said. It's urgent. Everything's urgent. You'll need to file a formal complaint and wait your turn. Sarah stepped forward and set her bag on the desk with enough force to make the deputy jump. Young man, we've ridden 3 days through dangerous country to bring evidence of fraud, intimidation, and attempted murder. You can either take us to the marshal right now, or you can explain to him later why you turned away witnesses to a crime involving one of Denver's largest law firms. The deputy's expression shifted from bored to wary. Which law firm? Coleman and Strauss? That got his attention. He stood up, suddenly all business. Wait here. He disappeared through a back door. Caleb and Sarah exchanged glances. Whatever reputation Coleman and Strauss had, it was enough to make even territorial law enforcement sit up and take notice. The deputy returned 5 minutes later with a man in his 50s, tall and lean, with the kind of face that had seen too much and forgotten how to be surprised by human behavior. Marshal Thomas Webb introduced himself with a handshake that was firm but not aggressive. My deputy says you've got information about Coleman and Strauss. More than information, Sarah said. We've got proof. Webb gestured them into his office, a cramped room that smelled like old coffee and tobacco smoke. They spent the next hour laying it all out. Marianne's inheritance, the threats, the weapons cache, the attack on Caleb's ranch, the legal intimidation. Sarah produced Mrs. Brennan's documents, spreading them across Webb's desk. The marshal read through each page carefully, his expression giving nothing away. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. This is substantial, he said finally, but it's also going to cause problems. Coleman and Strauss has connections. Judges, politicians, business interests. Going after them isn't like going after common criminals. So you're saying you won't help, Caleb said, feeling the familiar weight of disappointment settling in his chest. I'm saying I need to be careful about how I help. If I move too fast, they'll bury this in legal motions and jurisdictional disputes. But if I move smart, Webb tapped the documents. These show a pattern of intimidation and fraud. If I can tie it to the weapons you found, prove they were planning violence to achieve their business objectives, that's federal territory. Interstate commerce, conspiracy to commit violence, possibly mail fraud if they've been using the postal system to coordinate. So what do we do? Webb stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the busy street below. You go back to Red Hollow. Act like nothing's changed. I'll send a federal marshal and a team to investigate the weapons cache at the Brennan place. If they're still there, if we can prove they belong to Coleman and Strauss, we've got them. And if they've already moved the weapons, then this gets harder, but we work with what we have. Webb turned back to face them. I need you to understand something. Even if everything goes perfectly, this doesn't end quickly. Legal cases against firms like Coleman and Strauss take months, sometimes years. They'll fight every step of the way. But they will fight it in court, Sarah said, not with guns. That's the idea. It wasn't the immediate justice Caleb had hoped for, but it was something. More than they'd had when they arrived. They left the marshal's office with promises that action would be taken, investigations launched, wheels set in motion. It felt fragile, conditional, like it could all fall apart at any moment. But it also felt like the first time someone with actual authority had taken them seriously. The ride back to Red Hollow took 4 days instead of 3, because they didn't push as hard, didn't feel the same desperate urgency driving them forward. When they finally rode back into town, it was late afternoon, the sun painting Main Street in shades of gold. Tom Bridger saw them first and came running out of his store, relief written all over his face. Thank heaven. We were starting to think something happened. We made it. Talked to Marshal Webb. He's sending help. Well, that's something at least. Tom's expression darkened. Lots happened while you were gone. Caleb's stomach tightened. What happened? Strauss and his men tried to raid your ranch 2 days ago. Rhea and the others held them off, but just barely. Few people got hurt. Nothing fatal, but Doc Henderson's been busy. Is Rhea? She's fine. Stubborn woman wouldn't even let the doc look at a cut on her arm. Said she'd had worse. Tom glanced back toward his store. But Strauss is pushing hard now. He's filed more legal papers, got Judge Carver to issue a warrant for Rhea's arrest. Says she's the one who broke into the Brennan place, destroyed property, threatened Mrs. Brennan. That's a lie. Of course it is, but it's a lie with the judge's signature on it. Sarah made a disgusted sound. Carver's been in Coleman and Strauss's pocket for years. Everyone knows it, nobody does anything about it. Well, maybe that's about to change, Tom said. Your trip wasn't the only thing happening. Some of us have been busy too. He led them to the church, and Caleb was surprised to find it packed with people. Not just from Red Hollow, but from neighboring towns and ranches. Easily 50 people crammed into pews and standing along the walls. When Caleb and Sarah entered, conversations stopped. All eyes turned to them. Jack Chen stood at the front, and he cleared his throat. Caleb, Sarah, glad you made it back. We've been organizing while you were gone. Organizing what? A collective defense. We've all pooled money to hire a lawyer, a real one from Denver who's not afraid of Coleman and Strauss. And we've drawn up a petition to the territorial governor about Judge Carver's conduct. Got 200 signatures so far. Caleb looked around at the faces watching him. These were people he'd barely spoken to a week ago, who'd crossed the street to avoid him, who'd wanted him to just give up and make their lives easier. Now they were putting their money and their names on the line. Why? He asked. Why are you doing this? It was Sarah who answered. Because you showed us that standing up matters more than being safe. And because if they can do this to you, they can do it to any of us. Frank Wilson stood up from his pew. My grandfather homesteaded this valley. Broke his back turning dirt into farmland. I'll be damned if I let some Denver lawyers decide they own it just because they've got deeper pockets. Others nodded, murmured agreement. The mood in the church was different from anything Caleb had felt in Red Hollow before. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that. Something more like solidarity, purpose. Where's Rhea? Caleb asked. At your ranch, Jack said. We've got people posted there around the clock now. Strauss's men are camped about a mile out, but they haven't tried anything since the raid. Think they're waiting for something. They're waiting for the legal system to do their work for them, Sarah said bitterly. Arrest Rhea, tie Caleb up in court, make fighting back so expensive and exhausting that we give up. Then we don't give up, Caleb said, and he was surprised by the certainty in his own voice. We hold on until Marshal Webb's people arrive. We make noise, file our own complaints, gum up their legal machinery the same way they're trying to gum up ours. And if that doesn't work, someone asked from the back. Caleb thought about that, about all the ways this could still go wrong, all the power arrayed against them, All the reasons a smart person would walk away. Then we make it cost them so much that the next time they think about doing this to someone else, they remember Red Hollow, and they decide it's not worth it. It wasn't a rousing speech. It wasn't even particularly confident, but it was honest, and honesty seemed to be what these people needed. The meeting broke up shortly after, people heading home with plans to reconvene the next day. Caleb and Sarah rode out to the ranch together, both of them exhausted but too wired to properly rest. They found Rhea on the porch, rifle across her lap, looking like she hadn't slept in days. When she saw Caleb, something in her expression shifted. Not quite relief, but close to it. "You made it." "So did you." "Barely." She stood up, and Caleb could see the stiffness in her movements, the way she favored her left side. "They came hard. Would have overrun us if Ben Yates hadn't shown up with a dozen men from town. Tom told me people got hurt. Couple of broken bones, some cuts. Could have been a lot worse." She looked at Sarah. "You got the documents to Webb?" "We did. He's sending federal marshals to investigate the weapons cache." "When?" "Soon. Maybe a week." Rhea nodded slowly. "A week. We can hold for a week." But as it turned out, they didn't have to. 3 days later, a convoy arrived in Red Hollow. 4 federal marshals, accompanied by a territorial judge who wasn't on Coleman and Strauss's payroll. They went straight to the Brennan place, and what they found there was enough to make even Marshal Webb look impressed when he arrived the following day. Not just the weapons. Documents, too. Correspondence between Strauss and various territorial officials detailing bribes, threats, and a whole network of corruption that went far beyond Marianne's silver mine. Warrants were issued, arrests made. Strauss himself was taken into custody while trying to flee to Denver, and when federal agents searched Coleman and Strauss's offices, they found evidence of fraud involving dozens of land claims across 3 territories. It unraveled fast after that, the way things do when people realize the protection they thought they had is gone. Former allies turned on each other, cutting deals, providing testimony. Judge Carver was removed from the bench pending investigation. The bearded man and his crew disappeared, probably figuring they'd rather take their chances on the run than face federal charges. Within 2 weeks, the immediate threat was over. Within a month, Coleman and Strauss ceased to exist as a functioning law firm, its partners facing criminal charges, its assets frozen. And Marianne Hale's land, the silver beneath it, and her right to decide what happened to it all were secured by federal order. Through it all, Caleb kept expecting to feel victorious, triumphant, like this was some kind of ending. But mostly, he just felt tired and older than he had a month ago. The ranch had survived, though it bore scars. Bullet holes in the barn walls. Scorched earth where fires had been set and put out. Broken fence posts. All fixable, all repairable, but all reminders of what it had cost. Rhea stayed through the legal aftermath, giving testimony, helping coordinate the evidence. But as things settled down, as Red Hollow returned to something approaching normal, Caleb could see her getting restless. She'd been moving her whole adult life, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. This had been a job, maybe a favor to Marianne, but it wasn't home. One evening, about 6 weeks after Strauss's arrest, Caleb found her at the gate, saddlebags packed, her horse already saddled. "Leaving?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Job's done." "Is it?" She turned to face him, and in the fading light she looked both harder and more vulnerable than she'd been that first day she'd stepped off the stagecoach. "The people who were threatening Marianne are in jail. The legal claim to her land is solid. You're safe. What else is there? What about you?" "What about me?" Caleb stepped closer. "Where are you going?" "Don't know yet. Somewhere that needs someone like me, I suppose." "What if you stayed somewhere that wants someone like you?" Rhea's eyes searched his face, looking for something. "I'm not what you were waiting for. I'm not Marianne." "No, you're not." Caleb thought about all those letters, all those careful words building toward a future that never happened. Marianne promised partnership, quiet, stability. That's what I thought I wanted. And now? Now I know the difference between what I thought I wanted and what I actually need. He took another step closer. "You rode into a fight that wasn't yours. Could have walked away a dozen times and nobody would have blamed you. But you stayed. You fought. You bled for something you believed in. I stayed for Marianne. At first, maybe, but later? When you helped organize the town. When you held off that raid? When you spent 3 days teaching Frank Wilson's son how to shoot straight enough to defend his own property? Caleb shook his head. That wasn't for Marianne. Rhea was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. I don't know how to stay put. Every place I've ever been, eventually I wear out my welcome or find a reason to leave. So stay until you find a reason to leave. If that's tomorrow, fine. If it's next month, fine, but don't leave tonight just because you think it's what you're supposed to do. She looked at him, really looked at him, and Caleb made himself hold that gaze even though it felt like being seen in ways that were uncomfortable and necessary at the same time. I'm not easy to be around, she said finally. Neither am I, apparently. Whole town avoided me for 5 years before all this. I've got a past that'll follow me. Everyone's got a past. Question is whether it defines you or you define yourself despite it. Rhea's hand went to her horse's reins, and for a second Caleb thought she was going to mount up and ride away anyway. But instead, she started unbuckling the saddlebags. One condition, she said. What's that? I'm not replacing anyone. Not Marianne, not some idea you had about what your life was supposed to look like. If I stay, it's as myself. Exactly as I am. That's what I'm asking for. She nodded slowly, then carried her bags back toward the cabin. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. This might not work. Probably won't. We'll drive each other crazy. Almost definitely. Something that might have been a smile crossed her face. All right then. News reached them 2 weeks later that Marianne had successfully sold her land to a mining company for enough money to set herself up comfortably wherever she chose to go. She sent a letter to Caleb, apologizing again for the trouble, thanking him for what he'd done, and releasing him from any obligation he might have felt toward their arrangement. She also sent a separate letter to Rhea, which Rhea read alone and never discussed. But after reading it, she seemed lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying something heavy and had finally been allowed to set it down. Life in Red Hollow didn't transform overnight. People were still people, with all their flaws and hesitations. But something had shifted. The town had learned it could fight back against power that seemed overwhelming, had learned that standing together meant something. Tom Bridger remained as nosy as ever, but now he used his gossip network to spread word when someone needed help, or when trouble might be brewing. Sarah Winters converted part of her boarding house into a kind of informal legal aid office, helping people understand contracts and land claims before they got taken advantage of. Jack Chen started a volunteer watch program, teaching people basic security so they wouldn't be helpless if trouble came calling again. And Caleb's ranch became something different than what he'd planned. Rhea proved to have a gift for training horses, turning wild-caught Mustangs into reliable working animals that sold for good money. She also started teaching people, women mostly, but some men too, how to handle themselves in dangerous situations. Self-defense, situational awareness, marksmanship. It wasn't the quiet life Caleb had imagined when he'd first written to Marianne. It was louder, messier, more complicated. But it was also more real. They fought, of course. Caleb was used to doing things his own way, and Rhea had strong opinions about pretty much everything. But they learned to navigate those conflicts, to give each other space when space was needed, and push when pushing mattered. Months passed. Summer faded into fall, fall into winter. Snow came to the valley, transforming Red Hollow into something that looked almost peaceful, almost innocent. One evening in late winter, Caleb and Rhea sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the sun set over snow-covered hills. The ranch was quiet in the way it had been before all the trouble, but the quality of that quiet had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of presence, of shared purpose, of two people learning to exist in the same space without losing themselves. You ever regret it? Rhea asked. Not telling Strauss where Marianne was? Could have taken the money and walked away from all of it? Caleb thought about that. Sometimes I wonder what that version of my life would have looked like. Easier, probably. Quieter. But I wouldn't have learned what I was capable of. Wouldn't have found out that the town I'd been living in for 5 years actually had a spine when pushed hard enough. Wouldn't have met you. That last one might have been a blessing, Rhea said, but she was smiling. Might have been, but I'm glad I didn't find out. She leaned against him, and they sat there as darkness fell and stars emerged, bright and cold and distant. The truth that Caleb had learned through all of it, the truth that had cost blood and fear and sleepless nights, was simple but not easy. You couldn't build a life on avoiding trouble. Trouble found you anyway. The only choice was whether you faced it as yourself or as some smaller, safer version of yourself that you thought the world wanted. He'd wanted quiet, wanted simple, wanted a partner who would fit neatly into the life he'd already built. What he'd gotten was chaos and violence, and a woman who fit into nothing but carved out her own space with sharp edges and earned scars. And somehow, impossibly, that had turned out to be exactly what he needed. Not what he'd planned for, not what he'd asked for, but what he'd needed all along without knowing it. Years later, when people asked Caleb about that time, about the trouble that had come to Red Hollow, about Rhea, about how they'd ended up together, he would tell the story simply, leave out the parts that were too raw, too personal. But he'd always end it the same way. I was waiting for someone who'd make my life easier. Instead, I got someone who made my life matter. Turns out those aren't the same thing. And if people pressed him, asked if he regretted how it all turned out, he'd glance across whatever room they were in to where Rhea stood, still armed, still watchful, still entirely herself, and he'd answer honestly. Not for a second. Because that was the thing about choosing the hard path, about standing up when it would be easier to sit down, about fighting for something bigger than your own comfort. It changed you, made you into someone who could look at themselves in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. Caleb Mercer had spent 5 years building a life on silence and routine and the kind of safety that came from never risking anything important. Then a stranger had stepped off a stagecoach with a gun on her hip and a warning on her lips, and everything he thought he knew about himself had been proven wrong. He'd learned that he was braver than he'd believed, that a community could find its spine when pushed far enough, that justice was possible even when power seemed overwhelming, but most importantly, he'd learned that the life you plan for and the life you need are sometimes completely different things, and that recognizing the difference, accepting it, choosing it even when it's hard, that was what it meant to actually live instead of just exist. The ranch still stood on the edge of Red Hollow, its buildings showing the scars of what they'd survived. The town had grown some, gotten stronger, learned lessons about itself that it wouldn't forget. And two people who'd started as strangers, one waiting for a bride who never came, one arriving as a messenger of danger, had built something neither of them had planned for. Not perfect, not easy, but absolutely, undeniably real. And in the end, that was worth more than any amount of quiet could ever be.